Hi, my name is Paul Arnold and I'm a qualified psychotherapist and a trained coach. And today's session we're going to talk about calming overwhelm. And as always, I can only just give a brief scratching the surface of this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about theory, and I'm going to give some behavioral and cognitive strategy to maybe help. But realistically, this is again one of those areas which, going into psychotherapy could be massively helpful, because you think about it, it's about the emotional space. And very often where psychotherapy plays its biggest role is helping to deal with some of the emotions, very often triggered from very early trauma within our life. So let's start talking about calming overwhelm. It's that, it doesn't happen all the time, and for some people it happens more often than others, this sense of being completely out of control. It feels too much. Our heart is sort of beating out of our chest. Our breathing is becoming very shallow, very fast. We're just not able to think straight. Our blood pressure is sort of pounding out of our skull, and we're almost like rooted to the spot. And we just don't know how to get out of that space. And that just becomes terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And that's where often someone else has to help take control. Now, when we look into the theory of this, we know that, we call it affect regulation. Affect is just a nice posh word for emotional regulation. Absolutely gets laid down by our very earliest caregivers. The relationship we have with our mother or whoever that primary caregiver was, becomes the primary way that we learn to feel safe. And we often talk about right brain to right brain affect attunement. It's not so much what they say, it's the calmness they say, it's the eye contact, it's the gentle touching. It's all that stuff, is what makes a baby feels calm. And when the baby feels calm, we know from all the word in the world of neurology that basically this then starts to create the neural synapses, starts to trigger the brain to be able to deal better with that. So actually, how you are now was primarily set up by how your mother or whoever your primary caregiver was at the very start of your life. So if you had someone who was super calm, super controlled, everything's all okay, you're more likely to be a calmer child yourself and a calmer adult, and less likely to go into overwhelm, versus if you had a mother or a caregiver who was dealing with their own stuff, unfortunately, maybe they had less help, that you would have felt that. Emotions are contagious, and we certainly know that, anxiety gets passed through the mother's milk. One of the big pieces of work being done is done by a guy called Porges, and I apologise if that's not exactly how one pronounces his name, on polyvagal theory, and I recommend you sort of go and look a video about that. So I'm going to try to grossly simplify it. There are two fundamental nervous systems that connect with all our major organs in our body. You've got the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And what essentially happens is our body is trying to make sense of, is it safe? If it feels it's safe, it's okay. If it feels it's unsafe, then basically it makes this nervous system fire and lots of things happen. And we have what's called the hyperarousal level. It's when we go outside of what I call our windows of tolerance, and we get into what's called sort of extreme levels of sort of overwhelm. We go into the flight or fight. I just got to get out of here. I got to fight my way out of it. You don't care about consequence. I just got to somehow sort this out. And that takes us into hyperarousal. But for some people, when they go to overwhelm, they go into hypoarousal, which is a freeze. And it's a bit like sort of rabbits in the headlights. They just play in this space of like, I can't do anything about it. And they think it's the safest place to survive. Now, I hope I don't trigger too much stuff, but we certainly know that, in many, horrible sort of rape or sexual abuse cases, that certain people go into a place of freeze. And then they have massive guilt after, why didn't I fight back? Because your body was doing what it felt was safe at the time. Because we'll go into one of these places, because that's the way our body is learning to cope with it. And very often, we've had, what's called small t or big T trauma within our lives. A big T trauma is some major event, a 911, a loss of a parent at a really young age, whatever. And then we'll have small t trauma, which is like those constant, incessant niggling away at things. I had a lot of small t trauma because I've got a stammer. And at school every day when I opened my mouth, I failed. And of course I got teased, about it. So that set that up. But these therefore become, trauma becomes a major, condition that leads us to having overwhelm. Because, particularly, if it's been quite extreme levels, this is the way we cope with trauma. And a lot of work needs to be done to help deal with those traumatic events. For slightly lesser events, I talk what I call about the meaning cycle. And it's this idea that, some event triggers you. And it's not the event itself, it's the meaning we put from our past experiences in life, makes us see this as being a position that we are out of control in, that we feel threatened by, we basically feel unsafe in. And when that happens, it triggers a feeling of overwhelm, a feeling of stress, anxiety, a feeling of fear. And then what then basically happens after that is we'll then go into doing whatever actions we have defaulted learnt to do. So I often inquire with people, where do you typically go to? We always talk about the 4 F's, flight, fight, freeze or fawn. Fawn is like where you suck up to someone to like, please like me, please like me. It's another way of how do I address the situation and make sure I feel less threatened by it. And I often talk about, 2 definitions of the word fear, which thankfully I got from a lovely company called the Breakthrough Group. So thank you for that. FEAR. First stands for F everything and run. This is basic primitive fear. This is your amygdala, your limbic system saying it's dangerous. You are going to die. Get out of there. Do something to protect yourself. And then we have what I call false expectations appearing real. We think something's going to happen, but what's actually happening here is our primitive brain is being fired by something. We suddenly go, oh my God, oh my God. But of course that happens instantaneously, and only later it goes, oh, it wasn't a snake after all. But it doesn't matter. The action's already happened. So actually what we've got to do is be able to actually, look at the meaning and be able to address that. So let's look at some of the strategies about dealing with overwhelm. Look, well, the first thing is identify what your triggers are. What makes you go into overwhelm, and what do you do when you're in overwhelm, and how can you as much as possible stay away from those, or when it happens, get yourself out of that space. Look after yourself to do what's right for you, to calm yourself down. And obviously breathing is really important, because one of the most important ways that we regulate ourselves is from breathing. When you're in overwhelm, we need to breathe deeper. It's almost like we're having an asthmatic attack. You've got to learn to breathe deeper. So we talk about, the 5 square. So we hold for 5, then we breathe out for 5, then we hold for 5, and then we breathe in for 5, Or we'll talk about, you know, when someone goes into a hyper-arousal state in the therapy room, I'm often trying to get them back. So I'm saying the 5 senses. Yeah, tell me 5 things you see in the room. Tell me 4 things that you feel. Tell me 3 things you hear, etc., etc. So there's something about addressing that. And then obviously after the event, we want to explore the meanings. What meaning do you put? What was going on for you? And how can we reframe that to move yourself into a better space? And very often is that, how can we do one small thing to deal with it? Is there something we can do? Is there something like, could I just take 5 minutes, please? You do something like that. How do you salami cut it down? Now, because what very often lies at, the core of overwhelm is some trauma. And that's really where, one needs to go into therapy to try to address that. Now, I'll do another session all about dealing with trauma. It's a very slow process. Now, certainly, I would recommend, if anyone does have trauma, that they go and seek a specialist who's trained in EMDR, because there's a lot of positive evidence about the power of that. But if you come into therapy, we'd work on the root causes of the overwhelm and work on helping you process it to push you in a better space where you can be, sitting in a place of what we call the windows of tolerance. I hope that helps.